What's up, and welcome to Office Hours. I'm here for a little while, and we're going to just be answering questions. If you have a question, just be sure to leave it below with 3 question marks before the question. That way I can scan here, find the questions easily. And if you don't have a question, I want to pay homage to one of my favorite professors back at the university I studied at, Professor Hufker. He used to, every single time we walked into his class, he'd say, "All right, tell me an audio thing." And I think that it's the reason he did that is because it's important to explain things for some people to learn. I'm one of those people. I mean, that's why I have this YouTube channel, because when I explain things, it helps me understand it better. So if you don't have a question, tell me an audio thing that you learned recently, and maybe that'll start a conversation in and of itself. But yeah, I'll just be here for a little while. If you have any questions, please leave a comment below, and I'd love to answer anything audio related that you have on your mind. If you are not yet a member of our starter pass, you can click that QR code up there. It's give me your email address, and I'll give you a link to all of the free resources that Audio University offers. That's the ear training lab, the ear training guide, the frequency guide. You've got the acoustic panel blueprint, and a lot of other things in there. And yeah, you can also find a link to that below the video, but I'll leave that QR code up there in case you want to quickly scan it if you're watching on your TV or something. Arco is here. He is a member of our community. Thank you, Arco, for being here. Arco S. Um, we also have a membership. So the free tier, you can use the link below. Like I said, we also offer mixed coaching and just audio coaching in general. So if you're interested in taking the next step with us, you can enroll. There's a link below the video as well for that. But I'm going to put the free resources QR code back up so people can join us. We've got Andrea here. Welcome. Thank you both for being here. If you have any questions, I'm just going to be basically buying time until I get a question here. So didn't really come prepared with anything. Last time we were on for, I think, 90 minutes and just a solid stream of good questions. So I'm hoping that we see as much participation this time. Okay, so here's a question from Andrea. It says, I'm 14 years old trying to get into live sound. What would you suggest doing? It's a great question. I think that live sound is one of the easiest and most straightforward ways to get into the audio industry. And the reason is because live sound is something that you'll probably have a local live sound rental company in your region, if not in your city. So when I graduated college, I did an internship at a company called Logic Systems, and that was a regional company that would uh, they would rent equipment to people who wanted to set it up themselves, but mostly they would have a team of people, myself included, who would go out and install line array systems or even just small speakers on sticks systems, or they would go out and uh, provide amps for companies that would come through with their own speakers. They would provide amps and speakers for companies that or tours that would just come through. So what I'm saying, Andrea, is maybe look for some companies in your area that do rentals, because in studio world there are usually like one studio in your area, at least if you live in a mid-sized city like me. And if you live in a small city, there may be no studios. If you live in a big city, there may be, a handful, but you're probably in a city where a lot of people want to work in studios, if that's the case. However, live sound, I'm glad that you're looking into that because, well, a few reasons. Like I said, it's straightforward how to get into it. I would get an internship and go there. You may start by working in the warehouse and just scanning the microphones when they come in and scanning the microphones when they go out and keeping the inventory in check. That's what I started doing. But within a year, I was already out doing shows. And from day one, I was meeting my mentors, the people who would really end up being very important for me in my learning journey. So that's the reason number one. It's straightforward. There are companies that you can intern with and work for. as opposed to a studio. The reason number two is that live sound is something that it still requires people, you know, like there are many musicians out there recording themselves. And so the opportunities in studios are taking up a smaller proportion of the total amount of music that's being made. But you know, if you want to do live sound, then you'll have opportunities to mix the shows, to set up the equipment. You could even do some internships, or really, once you've done your internship at a rental company, maybe you, like me, start to work in some small clubs, and then you start to meet musicians, and you get some experience with a lot of different setups. So Andrea, that would be my recommendation for you, is to um, yeah, go see if you can get an internship. And then from there, I think you'll start to make connections that will get you opportunities with small clubs, larger venues, perhaps down the road. And no matter what, you're going to be working with people who can teach you a lot of things. So that'd be my recommendation for you. Good luck out there. Here's a question. It says, what sample rate do you track with? I I track with 48 kilohertz. The the idea that you need to track with higher than 48 kilohertz is debated. I'm not going to say that it's completely true or false. I do know that uh, many companies who record, especially classical music, will record at the highest sample rate they can possibly facilitate, just for future compatibility. In case someday down the road, uh, the capabilities expand where they can utilize a higher sample rate, and that's even the case with with DSD, and I forget what it's called, like Sigma something. There are different protocols that you can use when you're doing PCM, pulse code modulation. That's the typical setup. You'll usually see 44.1 kilohertz. That was CD quality, and that was the standard for a while. But now that video runs at 24 frames per second, typically, you'll see 48 kilohertz sample rate. And for those unfamiliar, that means that 48,000 times per second, a little snapshot is taken, and then it's played back. And so there are some advantages to using higher sample rates, but I think they're misunderstood. So when I was first learning about this, I thought, oh, okay, if you take more snapshots, it's going to make a smoother line or a smoother waveform. And that's not exactly true in a practical sense, because we use a anti-aliasing filter. And as long as you sample a wave 2 times within one wavelength, I think I'm getting that right. I'm just talking off the top of my head. Uh, Make sure you look up Nyquist theorem. You got to sample it 2 times, or actually, it's a little bit more than 2 times, I believe, um, than the highest frequency you want to capture. So, to put that into perspective, if I want to capture up to 20,000 hertz, I need to sample at least 40,000 hertz. And the reason that you've got 44.1 thousand hertz or 48,000 hertz is because we use that anti-aliasing filter. And if you only sampled at 40,000 hertz, the anti-aliasing filter would literally have to be a brick wall to prevent higher frequencies than the Nyquist frequency from getting in. And the smoother and more gradual you can make that filter, the fewer impacts or artifacts you'll hear. I've got a full video on this. If you search, let me actually find it for you, because I think it'll be really helpful. First off, I would recommend looking at Monty Montgomery's video and article for xiph.org. That's xiph.org. But I made a video based on his that I will pull up for you really quickly here, and I'll put it in the description or in the comments so that you can find it yourself. But let me think, is it digital audio? Let's find that. So I'm just searching through my video library here, and I'll find that for you and give you a link. Here it is. Nice. Okay. I think this is the one. So I'm going to put this in the description. I'll call it sample rate, and I'll put that right there for you. So not in the description, I'm sorry, it's in the comments. So right there is a video. You can't click it on screen, but if you go down into the comments, you'll find this sample rate. That's going to help you understand what I mean, and it'll have visuals so that you can understand it better. It's very difficult for me to. Here we go. Thank you, Arco. It says it's actually 2 times. The higher 44.1 was done due to historical reason, per some theory goes. Yeah, my understanding is that 44.1 rather than 40 kilohertz is to allow room for an anti-aliasing filter. Aliasing is what happens when you try to sample a frequency that is beyond the Nyquist frequency. Again, Nyquist frequency is double the highest, or it's actually the frequency that can be sampled. So yeah, at 40,000 hertz, the Nyquist frequency is 20,000 hertz. But again, if you look at that video in the comments, it's a lot easier for me to explain stuff when I have a chance to use visuals and things like that. So go check that out, and hopefully that helps answer the question for you. Okay, here's a question from Arco. I may not be able to answer this. It says, I use isotope RX for restoration, but I also use Audition. What do you think about Audition for restoration? I've used Adobe Audition a little bit back when I used Adobe Premiere Pro to edit my videos. I liked the graphics that Audition provided, but I never used the restoration, except I used to use a little bit of like de-reverb and things like that back when I had no acoustic treatment. But um, RX is certainly one of the most, like, the industry standard for restoration. You also come across a company called Cedar, if you haven't run into them before. But Audition, I'm not sure. They may have great restoration features. Sorry, Arco, I couldn't provide a better answer for you. Okay, here's a question. It says, is a silent stage, like with an electronic drum kit, better or worse for a sound guy? Depends on how good the electronic drum kit sounds, I guess. But what I can tell you is that a really, really loud drum kit, particularly really, really loud cymbals, can be pretty problematic. Um, there are a few reasons. First off, especially in a small venue, if the cymbals are already too loud for the audience, you can't use the PA to turn stuff down. So it's best if every instrument on stage is quieter than it needs to be, or just exactly as loud as it needs to be. But if it's too loud, you're going to run into problems. Then you start to have to turn everything else up too loud to sound in balance with it. I've got a video on that too. It's right here. I'm going to put it in the comments just like I did before. Let's say stage volume. So if you go down below to the comments, you'll find a video that says stage volume, and that talks about stage volume. And so getting to your question, let me bring it back up here so that we can make sure we're answering the right question here. Okay. Is a silent stage, like with an electronic drum kit, better or worse for a sound guy? Like I said, some electronic drum kits sound horrible. And so I'd much rather have a too loud drum set than an electronic kit. But some electronic kits sound great. And I guess it ultimately depends on the samples that you're using as well. But getting to your larger question, is a silent stage better or worse for a sound guy? I'd say that a silent stage is the best. Well, I don't want to say that, because there's some feeling that comes with hearing the sound off of the stage. But let me say this. In a studio, that's the experience you'd have if the stage was completely silent, because the only sound you hear when you're mixing in a studio is the sound coming from the monitors, which is sound that was picked up by a DI or a microphone of some sort. Whereas in live sound, you're dealing with the sound that comes directly from the stage. And like I said before, if things on stage are too loud, then you may start to run into problems. This is why shows often sound really bad in small venues, because the drums are just so loud that the vocals, they almost can't compete unless you had a really powerful PA system. But then even if you had a really powerful PA system, what are you doing to the audience's ears if you actually boost it up loud enough to get over the sound of those cymbals? So I don't want to say if it's better or worse to be silent, because there may be something to be said about sound reinforcement. That's the key here, though. When you're mixing in live sound, typically the stage won't be silent. And so you need to just put yourself in the mindset of sound reinforcement. Like I said in that video I just linked to, uh, I like to think, what can I not hear? Or what needs to be louder? And then I go from there. Rather than saying, how loud can I get the kick drum? How loud can I get the snare, etc.? I like to say, what needs to be loudest? And usually that's the vocals. Pair that with the fact that the vocals are usually quietest. And that means that the vocals are the thing that need to be amplified the most. They're the quietest on stage and they need to be the loudest in the mix. So I start with the vocals and I get those to a level that I can hear over the stage. And then I start to add things. And I may need to add more vocal as I start to put other things in the PA. But I also like to take a minimalist approach. I wouldn't recommend just sending everything to the PA for the sake of sending everything to the PA. I'd recommend, like I said, asking what needs to be reinforced, sound reinforcement. Now, if the stage were silent or if you're mixing in studio, then it's just sound reproduction. You're trying to take everything and paint a picture from the ground up. But usually in a live situation, you won't have a silent stage. And so I like to take um, the mindset of sound reinforcement. Check out that video. I've got images and graphics and things that will help make that point more clear. All right, just looking for another question here. Thanks everybody for joining us. As I'm going through this, looking for questions, you can find the free resources library up here or a link in the description below. That'll give you access to all the free stuff that we offer. I will ask for your email address and I'll stay in touch with you. But if you don't want that, you can just unsubscribe. That's fine. But I would like to stay in contact with you because, like I said before, we have, we post a video every week and we do these live streams, and we also have a paid membership. And this is just the way that I can communicate with you about that kind of stuff. Okay, so let's build upon the question that was just asked. It looks like we have another add-on to that. It says, is a silent stage with an E-kit better or worse for a small venue? That's the question we already answered, but how do you monitor that? Also, will running the whole band, bass, guitar, vocal, and drums for the PA be too muddy for the PA? I don't know. It depends. If you have an acoustics rig that's absolutely amazing and you're in an open free field, you're probably going to be hard pressed to run into a muddiness problem with that. But if you're using really old EV speakers in a tiny square room, it may not be the PA that struggles, but rather it might be just the venue. But yeah, there is something to be said about when you start to ask too much of the PA, or even in a studio, you ask too much of a speaker, it could get muddy. Especially if it's like a two-way system where the woofer is required to do the lows and the mids and everything all from one driver. So, to answer your question, that is kind of the trick. That's the reason there's a front of house engineer there. How do you monitor that? I'm not sure what you mean about that. Do you mean monitoring as a front of house mixer, or maybe monitoring it as a musician on stage? If it's an electronic drum kit and you need to monitor it, you could use in-ear monitors. That'd probably be the most popular option these days. You could also use like a floor wedge that's on the floor pointing up at the drummer, and probably other members so that they can hear the drums, although that's going to raise your stage volume. I'd say if you're going for a silent stage so that the front of house mix can be as clear as possible, then everyone's probably going to be in-ear monitors. That way they can have a nice mix for themselves without muddying up the mix for the front of house system. And now I better understand your question actually as I've talked through this. Would the stage volume muddy up the PA mix? Yeah, I think that's a common issue. Now I'm not I am a proponent of in-ear monitors, but I also get why some people would like to have side fills, or they'd like to feel the guitar amp on their jeans. They're used to that, and there's something rock and roll about feeling the sound, and you don't really feel the sound when you're using in-ear monitors. So it's sort of a give and take, but there are a lot of benefits to getting stage volume down and monitoring with in-ear monitors. And these days, I think you can really even perhaps get a superior monitor mix by doing that compared to um, the way we used to do monitors back in the day with real speakers pointing back to the stage. Okay, looking for some more questions. Sorry for the dead air. I really should get an assistant here to read these questions for me and find them for me, but what are you going to do? I'm here alone, so thanks for dealing with the dead silence. Here's a question. Okay. For a small bedroom setup without acoustic treatment, would you know of a way to EQ it to sound crisper and somewhat similar to a pro condenser mic? So I'm assuming you mean you have no acoustic treatment in your room and you're trying to record and make your recording sound crisp. I guess the fact that you say make it more similar to a pro condenser mic would suggest you mean use a dynamic mic and make it sound crisp. So, yeah, I mean, there are a few ways. I'm in a room that's pretty well treated, but let me see if I can give you a demonstration here. So I'm going to share my screen because it's an audio channel and you guys might be interested in seeing this. Okay. So hopefully you can see this. This is total mix. I'm going to take that QR code off the screen so we can see. So over here, I've got channel 1, and that's what this microphone's plugged into. But of course, I got to gain it up a little bit so that we can actually get some level. 1, 2, check. Okay. So I'm here at about a good level, and I'm going to bring it up in this mix that you guys are hearing. So check 1, 2, 1, 2. And then I'm going to bring this down. This is my shotgun mic. So let me know if you're still hearing this or if you're not hearing this. Hopefully you are. So, like I said, I'm in a pretty well acoustically treated room, so it already sounds pretty good. But what I can tell you is that when you are further away from the microphone, there's going to be direct sound reaching the microphone directly. And then there's going to be indirect sound that will reflect off of walls and then bounce back to the mic. In the indirect sound in your case is kind of the issue, right? Because that's what's maybe causing mud. You mentioned that it's not acoustically treated, your room. So I think I'm assuming that the room sound is the issue you're asking about. Well, when I'm distance away from the mic, the sound gets a little bit quieter before it reaches the mic, and then as it travels and hits a wall, it gets quieter, and then it's relatively very quiet by the time it gets back. When I'm here, the difference in how quiet the the difference in level between direct sound and indirect sound is it's not as large, right? There's a the indirect sound and direct sound are closer in level the further the mic is placed from the mouth. So, or from the source of any kind. So what I mean is when I get closer, I get louder in the mic, and relative to the direct sound, the indirect sound gets quieter. So that'd be my first recommendation. If you have no acoustic treatment, placing the microphone really far away, um, it might give you a more natural sound. More on that in a second, but it's going to reduce the ratio between direct sound to indirect sound. So maybe try getting the mic closer. But you notice that when I put the mic closer, it changes not only the level but the timbre, the tonality. It's something called the proximity effect. And the reason you hear that is because I'm using a directional microphone. This is a cardioid mic, and um, that's good. You want a directional microphone because it's going to reject some of the indirect sound bouncing off of walls. But at the same time, when you move a directional microphone closer to the sound source, yes, you'll be reducing the amount of indirect sound that's picked up relative to the direct sound, but you also might not like the tonality that comes with this. It may sound more natural when I place the microphone right here and less natural when I place the microphone right here. This is probably what you're used to if you're used to listening to podcasts. This might be something more similar to what you're used to when listening to vocals. And when you're trying to get a vocal to fit into a mix, you may not want all that extra boomy, low frequency sound. So I guess what I'm saying is you might try bringing the microphone a little bit closer to you, but be aware of the proximity effect and how that could cause the tonality of the recording to not sound as you want. So you got a cardioid microphone that blocks some of the indirect sound. You've got it closer to the source that blocks some of the sound. The next thing would be, if you can at all possible, if it's at all possible, use some acoustic treatment. I'm going to get this back to my regular mic. Okay. If at all possible, use some acoustic treatment. A few reasons for that. First, it's going to help reduce the amount of reverb that returns to the microphone. And that's that really late, like you say something and then you hear it, or maybe an echo where you can hear your voice and then you hear the decay in the room. And that doesn't usually sound that good in a square rectangular room. We're going to talk about how acoustic treatment can be, how you can use like sheets or something, or not sheets, but you can use like a blanket for that. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But first, let me say that if I'm here and I have a cardioid mic and I've got a reflection from the desk, the cardioid mic's not going to help with that, because what's happening is there's actually no sound right there at certain frequencies, because the sound is reflecting off the desk and it's coming back up and it's interacting with the direct sound. So it doesn't matter if you block that out with the cardioid mic. There's no pressure there to pick up. So you would need acoustic treatment to fix problems with comb filtering from direct early reflections. Okay. So some things you just can't block out with a cardioid mic. Now, those longer tail things, if a sound goes around here, bounces around, and 100 sounds hit here all at once, and it just sounds like reverb. Now, those things a cardioid mic could help with. And the reason I say all this is because often you see people putting acoustic treatment here, and that prevents sound from returning to the part where the microphone's not that sensitive. But rather than do that, maybe if you've only got one piece of acoustic treatment, for example, I wouldn't put it here. I'd put it back here, because this is the part where the microphone is most sensitive. So I have a video that I'll show you. I think it's called, let me just look this up, how to, it's not there. I really want to find this for you though. Here we go. 3 ways to reduce echo and reverb without spending any money. Yeah. Okay. So I'll call this reduce echo without treatment. And if you're watching this, I think these comments might go away. So if you're watching this live, maybe go get that link right now if you wanted to watch that video. And if you're watching this on the replay, they may be down there. I'm just not sure. So maybe go check that out. But this video right here, Again, you won't be able to click it on the screen, but you can go into the comments and click that link. I talk about 3 ways to reduce echo and reverb. And you know what? I'm pretty sure I talk about the cardioid polar pattern or some directional polar pattern. I think I talk about bringing the mic closer. And I think I talk about putting acoustic treatment or maybe even blankets up on a mic stand or something behind you. So the 3 things that I just told you. But of course, in that video that's linked in the comments, it's going to have visuals and it's going to be explained a lot more concisely than I just did right here off the cuff. So I hope that helps with your question. And that is a really good question. So thank you for being here and asking it. Okay, I'm going to find another question now. Again, if you have a question, please put question marks before it. It's really hard for me to read all of these and talk at the same time. So the question marks really help me. Ooh, this is a fun question right here. What do you prefer, live or studio? Oof. You know, when I went to college, I went there with the intention. When I went to college for recording, I went there with the intention to record music or maybe mix in a studio somewhere. But then the more I learned about audio and signal flow and all of that, the more I learned that I really like troubleshooting. And I like the pressure of things aren't working and it's my job to get them to work. So after college I went into live sound primarily. And I mean, I liked it, but it is high pressure. There's a part of me that absolutely hates that, and there's a part of me that absolutely loves that. And if you're a live sound person, you know exactly what I mean. There's also something that I like about live sound, that the mix, you cannot just sit and worry about it for hours and hours and hours and days and months. The mix is done when the band is done. Um, and I kind of like that. Like, you do your best to make the mix sound as good as possible in that moment, and then it's over. And you get to go home and you don't feel the urge to pull up the session and keep working on it because it's gone in time. And so that's really a cool thing about live sound. But you know, the studio, I haven't worked in huge studios with awesome artists. You know, I've done live sound stuff where I've been in really close proximity and working on shows with huge artists, and that was really fun. I can imagine doing that same thing in the studio would be very rewarding too, but I can't really speak to that. The studio stuff I've done has been mainly with my own music. And I think that there's something really cool about having time and having creative input and having the ability to to more carefully shape the sound, you know? Like, live sound does have that pressure and it's fun. And studio has pressure too in some situations, but nowadays I love going down into my basement and having some friends who are musicians come over and spending the day just building a song. Like, there's nothing I'd rather do. So yeah, I'd say I like both. Um, but I'm also very glad to be in a situation where I can do studio stuff that it's not my job, right? I'll be straight with you. I think that when you do something as your job, it sort of changes a little bit. And it took me a long time. I went to college. I used to record my own music all the time in college. And then I went into doing it as my career, particularly in live sound. And guess what? I kind of stopped recording my own music for a while because it was my job and is the last thing I wanted to do. But now that we've come full circle and I'm able to do this as my job and teach people about this stuff, I've been really getting back into doing the studio stuff. And it's very rewarding because now it's just the process. It doesn't even matter at the end of the day, like how good it sounds, honestly. Like, it does. That is a cherry on top. But some of the best days I've had in my life were downstairs in my basement making music with my friends. So I'd say overall, I probably like the studio for that reason. But that's a complicated answer. All right, here's another question. When we travel to a youth camp with my church once a year. The cymbals are so loud. We've tried adding foam and a shield around the kit, but it's still too loud. We camp in a month. Any tips? Yeah. Let me think about this for a second. First, you when you place like foam, probably wouldn't be very effective because unless it is really thick foam, really foam isn't intended to block sound. It's intended to absorb reflections. And so like on the wall, the sound goes in and some of it's lost to heat and then it bounces back and some of it's lost to heat and that's effective. However, some of it bounces back and most of it still bounces back. Now at those higher frequencies, that's good. It's a short wavelength. You could absorb a good amount of that because those are thick panels and they're not long wavelengths that we're trying to absorb. But getting back to your question, foam I wouldn't expect to work because it's really more for acoustic treatment on a wall to absorb sound to prevent reflections. And then when you get into the shield, so like a shield can it can reflect sound, but sound can also go around the shield. Not only that, but sound will reflect off of other stuff and go around the shield. Sound will reflect off the shield and then bounce off of other stuff and go around the shield. What you'd really need is to, if you want to soundproof something, you need to make sure that no air can vibrate from the inside to the outside. And there's a few different ways to do that. And I would guess that almost all of those ways are outside of the budget. So I won't go into talking about that because that's more so the way that people do soundproofing in a studio. But I say all that to just be straight with you that it's actually really hard to soundproof anything to prevent sound from the inside getting to the outside or vice versa. But what can you do? The drummer could try playing with more dynamics and quieter. That would help. Maybe use like, what do they call those sticks? With they're like a bundle of sticks rather than one big stick. That would help a lot too. I've seen some things in churches that it is kind of like a fiberglass dome, or not a dome, but a chamber, and that would be better because then the sound that reflects off of one side bounces and reflects off of the ceiling and then bounces off the wall. And so that's going to really mess up the timbre of the drums. It'll sound very phasey probably, but you'll have better luck with sound not getting out. And then I would recommend you go watch that video that's in the comments. It's called Stage Volume. So check that out because it's relevant for this conversation too. But I would ask, what is the problem that the drums are causing? Is it that the people in the crowd are just hearing too much drums when there are no mics on stage? That's a tough problem to fix. Or is it a problem where the drums are pretty loud, but then they're just way too loud when you turn the vocal mics on? Then you might be able to work around this because often what happens is you'll have a vocal right here. Let's do it right here. We'll have a vocal downstage center, and then we'll have a drum set right behind the vocalist. And that's not great because remember, the mic is most sensitive right here. So all the cymbals are going straight in there, and it's hard for the vocal sometimes to even compete with the amount of cymbals getting in the vocal mic. So if that's your problem, then you might be able to do something. You could just think, well, the microphone is most sensitive right here. So let's not put the drum kit right behind the vocalist. Let's move the drum kit off to the side. And now at least the cymbals are going to be approaching the microphone from the side where it's less sensitive. There will be some that'll reflect off. Like I said, it's hard to block sound because cymbals tend to go everywhere. But I think that would be my recommendation. You know, like a drum shield can be helpful. And maybe the drum shield can also be a part of this equation. The drum shield, rather than trying to keep the drum sound away from everybody, maybe the drum shield can just help prevent the drum sound from getting into those mics that have a lot of gain applied to them, such as the vocal mics. And then, of course, let me just say, like, I would not recommend putting overhead mics on a drum kit that's too loud. You might use a kick mic, you might use a snare mic, but maybe you don't even need a snare mic if it's already too loud. Again, put yourself in the mindset of how do these things work? We know that microphones are typically cardioid for the vocalists, so let's get the drum kit outside of the cardioid polar pattern. We know that you can't really turn stuff down with a PA system, so let's use the PA system sparingly to only turn up the things that really need to be turned up. I hope that helps. I feel you though. I've mixed so many shows that just it couldn't sound good because the drum kit, even at the side of the stage, we're in such a small room and the drummer's hitting the cymbal so hard. There's not much you can do. One last thing I might suggest is if you always start the sound check with the kick drum, maybe change that for a second. One of the free resources that you can find right here with the QR code or linked down below, one of them is the sound check checklist. And in that, I give you two recommendations. You can either do the traditional sound check where you start with the instruments and then do vocals last. Kick drum, please, snare drum, tom 1, tom 2, and so on, bass, guitar. Or you can do what I like to do, which is start with the vocal. And the reason I start with the vocal is because I know it's going to be a struggle when I get to the vocal. So, and I also know that the vocal needs to be heard more than anything, and it's really quiet. So everything's working against the vocal. So if you start with the vocal and you get it as loud as you can without feedback, knowing that when the drums start playing, those vocals are going to need to be loud, then you don't waste as many resources from the PA system on the kick drum and on the snare drum and on the bass, etc. You're sort of like you're starting with what's most important, the vocal, and then you build everything else around that. And for me, that's really helped because you're able to utilize the PA to get the most important thing out front, and then you may not end up putting as much kick as you would have had you started with the kick drum. So hopefully that helps. Yeah, let us know how the camp goes. I hope that's helpful. All right, we've got Mac. He's a member, founding member actually, been with us for a couple years now. Thank you, Mac. Your question: do you have experience with or any recommendations when it comes to actually trying to get good gear but not buying garbage? I bought a Behringer Composer and it was embarrassing. It was as was a DBX preamp. So let me look what a Behringer Composer is so we know what we're talking about. Okay. Behringer Composer is a compressor, limiter, and expander. Yeah. I mean, as far as compressors, limiters, and expanders go, unless you're getting something that's like you want that thing because it has a special sound, like for a compressor, if you're getting a LA2A or LA3A or 1176, you're getting it because you know that that thing can give you something that no other thing can. But a typical run of the mill compressor or limiter or expander or gate, I don't know. I would just recommend using plugins because the plugins that are available, even as the stock plugins, are amazing. And then if you look at this thing is $150, $160 in the US. I mean, you can get a really cool plugin for that, So I would urge you to think it is cool and you can learn a lot by using outboard gear, but the amount of money you spend relative to the value you get is, I mean, it's no contest. You get way more value out of a plugin because not only does it probably sound just as good as a low end outboard piece of effects like this, but you can also use it on every channel, a plugin. Whereas you can only use one channel. And then you said the DBX preamp. Yeah, I mean, DBX can make some good stuff. In fact, I've got a DBX 160 here. It's actually a 560, and that's a cool compressor. However, do I use it that often? No, because like I said, I tend to use plugins. Preamps, there are no plugins that do the whole job of a preamp. You can get a plugin that emulates a preamp, but somewhere in the chain you have to have an analog preamp if you want to record analog microphones. So a preamp is a good question. I would say when you're looking at a preamp, Mac, maybe ask yourself, do I want the preamp to impose a certain tone onto what I'm recording, or do I just want it to be as clean as possible? That's where I'd start. Um, there are a pair of preamps right here, the Cranbourne Camden 500s that I've got, and they have a switch. They've got really clean setting or relatively to extremely colorful setting. So that would be my option. My recommendation, no matter what you're looking for, is what do I want this thing for? You know, and maybe if you're if you're buying gear just for the sake of buying gear, brother, I understand you. You know, I get it. I like gear too. But if you're really trying to be conscious about what you're buying, maybe you get yourself a plugin alliance subscription and try a bunch of stuff in the digital realm. And if you really love that 1176 emulation, or if you really love that preamp emulation, or if you really love, whatever the plugin is trying to model, then maybe you think about getting the physical hardware piece. Now, I say this stuff because you're talking about effects. You mentioned a preamp, but then otherwise you mentioned the compressor limiter and gate. But if you're looking at like microphones, I don't know. What's your question exactly? Do you have experience with or any recommendations when it comes to actually trying to get good gear but not buying garbage? I don't know. I I think you lead with intention, like I said. Why do I want this thing? What do I want it to sound like? Like if you're buying a microphone, do I want something that is very versatile? Well, then I might get an SM57 or an SM58. Do I want to spend a little bit more money? Well, then I might get myself a 421 or a 441 or a SM7B or a RE20. Do I want it to sound bright? Well, then I might get myself a condenser mic. How bright do I want it to sound? Do I want it to add color? Maybe I get myself a tube mic. Do I want uh, it to add no color? Well, then I maybe get myself a transformerless mic. Do I want it to be bright? I get a 414 or something? Do I want it to be dark? Maybe I get a JZ Amethyst. I think that you basically just have to know what you want it to do. For versatility, there are options. There's like standard dynamic mics, and there are like U87-esque mics that sound good on basically anything you put it on. And then for specialty, there are lots of options, endless options, in fact. So, yeah, I'd say to answer your question and to end my ramble, like just buy stuff with intention. And that's what we talk about in the membership. You know that very well. And I know you've done a good job of that. You're in the phase right now, Mac. It seems that you're experimenting with a lot of stuff. I'd urge you to experiment with the stuff that doesn't cost that much, that doesn't cost money, because you can get a lot more experimentation done with a plugin alliance subscription where you can try a bunch of digital stuff than you can buying one thing. And the fact that you bought the Behringer Composer tells me that you wanted to try something new, but you didn't want to spend that much on it. So I'm thinking if budget's a primary concern, you're going to get a lot more bang for your buck by going with the plugin emulation than going for the lower end hardware gear. Now, if you've got an endless amount of money, then I'd recommend going for the really high end, multiple $1,000 hardware gear. But again, I think you're better off, if budget's a concern, to go with the digital realm. And there's no harm in not having intention when you don't even really know what the different stuff does. We've all got to experiment in order to create that intention and know what we're looking for. But again, hardware stuff is risky, especially at the entry level. So I'd stick with the plugins. All right, here's a question. It says, "Hi, Coach." I like that. Hi, Coach. What do I need to use a WK 7600? Let's see what this is. Casio WK7600 with my iPod on stage. It's a portable arranger. Am I going to be able to get... Yeah, here we go. So I'll look at this here. Let's look at the back of this thing. So here's what we're working with. It's a keyboard. And if I look at the back connections, I can see that it's got a... That's for a pedal. Instrument in. Interesting. Mic in. These are outs here. Okay, phones, outs. And the question again is, how do I get to work with my iPod on stage without any cable connection to the iPod? Oof. Yeah, I'm not sure that's possible. I mean, the only way to do that would be with Bluetooth, and this thing doesn't have Bluetooth. So you would need to get probably a mixer would be the way to go. Something like the Mackie Pro FX, let's say 10 V3. So here's, yeah, if I understand your question correctly, which I'm not sure I do, but I think this is what you mean. How do I get those things to work together? And I'm assuming that you've got speakers that are external. You could connect those right here to these main outs. And then you could connect the keyboard to one of these channels or two of these channels for stereo. And then this has a Bluetooth connection as well. At least I believe it does. Let me make sure. Oh man, does it not? Okay. Well, if that doesn't, then I thought this did. I thought this thing had a Bluetooth. Let's see. Guess not. Well, maybe we're going Tascam. Although that's going to be more expensive. I would recommend getting a analog mixer that's small and has Bluetooth. I'm not sure exactly which one to recommend off the top of my head, but then you can connect the iPod with Bluetooth, you can connect the keyboard with analog, and then connect it to your speakers with analog cables using the main outs. That's my recommendation. All right, another question here. Says, any tips to learn to listen for the cuts and bandwidth in the moment and apply EQ in mix context? Yeah, I've got tips. I've got the ear training guide. So that's the ear training guide's free, and it comes with a tool that we developed called the Ear Training Lab. So I would recommend definitely starting with that. If you haven't tried that, if you are okay giving us your email address, we can send you the link to it. If you're one of the people who you don't want us to have your email address, that's fine. Just go to YouTube and search Ear Training Audio University. And in fact, I'll just find you that video right now. Here's what I would recommend. This changed everything for me. Right here. Ear training. I'm going to put this in the comments. So yeah, learning to hear the right frequencies and apply it in a mix, that's one of the specialties of Audio University, in my opinion. So we've got this video on ear training. Go check that out. It's the vowel method. I won't go into it too much here because it's so much better to just watch the video. But basically you can create reference points for yourself by listening for vowel sounds. So you'll learn by using this tool that ooh is 250 hertz and o is 500 hertz and ah is 1K and a is 2K and e is 4K. And there's even more for the lows and the highs. And yeah, if you do that, you're instantly going to start hearing EQ, or you're going to start hearing frequencies better and being more confident with EQ. And then if you want to take that to the next level, we have a full 15-week course. Go to Get a Mixing Coach. That QR code, there's also a link in the description below. 15-week course where we progressively get you from a complete beginner to the point where you can identify boosts or dips at the octave bands, 63 hertz, 125 hertz, 250, 500, 1 kilohertz, 2 kilohertz, 4 kilohertz, 8K, and 16K. So go check that out. If we've got any members who have done the ear training course, please let us know. I've gotten some great feedback on it. I myself have really benefited from that program. So yeah, that would be my number one recommendation. But without just like promoting the stuff I do, let me see if I can give you a better question or a better answer than just that. Here we go. So your question was, how do you learn to listen and use EQ in a mix? And you go on to say, so that the mix doesn't sound muddy. Yeah. So if your mix sounds muddy, I would recommend looking into probably the low mids. Usually people use muddy to describe when there's too much stuff happening in the low mids. Now, something you might do is just start to bring up two instruments at a time. Bring up the kick drum and the bass and listen for what frequencies you hear in the kick drum and also in the bass. And then maybe cut that frequency out of one or the other. Now, again, you may be in a place where you're like, what do you mean listen to what frequencies? If you're in that place, follow my first recommendation and go check out the ear training. But aside from the ear training, another good thing to do is just to get an EQ and play a single instrument through it, and then just, boost and move the EQ filter around until you hear the frequency that sounded bad coming out, right? So that's a good technique. Is you can start with an instrument going into an EQ, and then you start with a boost, and you try to find the frequency that you're hearing by just moving it through the frequency spectrum. And when you hear it and it sounds really, really bad, well, then you take that boost and you make it a cut. And that's another way you can get there. The ear training, though, I can't urge you enough to go check that out, because then you're going to be at a point where you can just hear and say, okay, that's between 250 hertz and 500 hertz. Let's go looking there. And you don't have to do the big sweep method. The danger of the sweep method is that anything sounds bad when it's boosted by 12 dB. Well, not necessarily, but you can make a lot of stuff that doesn't sound bad if you boost it by 12 dB. So it's better to start to just get an understanding of what's where, and then you can intentionally go find it and cut it, or boost something to balance something out, but yeah, you can use the ear training method. You can use the boost and sweep method. But then I think that just get your 10,000 hours in, like play with an EQ and boost stuff and say, oh, okay, so that's what happens. That's kind of what it sounds like when I boost 200 hertz. And then turn it down and move it to 800 hertz. Okay, it kind of sounds like that. Now, that's going to be very subjective compared to the more objective language we use in ear training with the vowel sounds, but it's you can't really. It's kind of like it's like learning a language in a way, and it's like anything really. You just have to kind of practice it. And I created the ear training system because in my school, the ear training system they used was extremely helpful, because I get what you're coming from. If you hear me say, you just have to practice, and you're like, man, what a horrible answer. How unsatisfying. Even though that's the truth, it is unsatisfying to hear that. And I get that. So that's why we created the ear training. Yeah. All right, let's find another question here. Thanks everybody for being here, by the way. Here's a question from Mac. It says, what broadcasting software are you using? I'm using Restream is what I'm using. Now I've heard, I thought about getting Riverside FM. So that's interesting. Although I had already bought a year subscription to Restream. Now, the reason I use Restream, I think Riverside does the same thing. Another one that's popular is StreamYard. I'm using Restream. It lets me put these comments up here. That's nice. It also, Mac, you're a member. You've been up on screen with us. It lets me bring people up on screen, which is particularly useful for the membership, where we can talk more like a video call, but also stream. And then, of course, the primary function of this is that I could stream to both YouTube and Instagram and Facebook and other platforms all at once. So it's like a multi-stream software. So those are the things I like. It's got cool features like the QR code. It's kind of nice. Let me think what else. Yeah, I can have like little presets up here. You know, I can just click. You can't see it, but I'm just clicking a thing on the side of my screen, and that loads a scene where it's this screen down here and me in the bottom right corner. I can load videos in here and then play them. I've done that in some of my past streams. So yeah, Restream's been pretty good. I think the reason I chose Restream is because it had the highest bit rate for audio, but I think it was still only like 250 kilobits per second or something like that. So it's not excellent sound quality or anything, but it gets the job done. Okay, I'm going to take a drink of coffee, and then I'm going to read these questions, and I'll be back in a sec. Again, thanks everybody for being here. I appreciate it. It's a little bit slow paced with me just being here by myself. So um, it's probably boring when I'm looking for questions, but hopefully, if you asked a question, you're getting value out of my answer. And hopefully, um, if you didn't ask a question, you're just um, getting value from hearing my answers for other people's questions. All right. Arco, another member. Here's a question. It says, did you ever work with drum techs? And what was your experience? Yeah, my best friend is a drum tech, Ernesto. You've seen him on some of my videos. He's the drummer. When I have a drummer in my videos, it's Ernesto. And he, like he's had a great career as a drum tech. He doesn't travel with a band in that sense, but he is the guy who brings the drums and sets them up for tours that come through our city. He also travels to different festivals around the country as well. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure your question, like if you want to be a drum tech, Arco, or if you are just curious about like what the process looks like. But typically, if you're touring with a band, you'll have the drum set. It's in the truck. You load the drum set into the venue. You set it up. You tune it, and then you work with the drummer to do what he needs you to do. And if you're like Ernesto and you work locally with bands that come through the area, you do the same thing. You load up the truck. In Ernesto's case, he is a drum tech, a keyboard tech, a guitar tech, a piano tech, Hammond B3 organ tech. He's a backline tech. So I think it's a pretty cool job. He gets to go to festivals all the time. He's gotten to work with, like Herbie Hancock and a whole bunch of really cool artists. But yeah, I think that if your question is, have you worked with a drum tech to record? You're onto something there, because I'll tell you, I Ernesto has given me a drum kit to keep in my basement so that when he comes over, he can use it. And that drum set sounds really good. But when I tried to tune it myself, it did not sound good. And I've got some really amazing microphones. I've got acoustic treatment in my basement. I've got great preamps from RME. I've got amazing gear, but it didn't sound as good as Ernesto's house. Ernesto, he's got pretty good acoustic treatment as well, but he's using the mics that I gave him. They're like Audix mics that I gave to him. I was like, I never use these. They're not that good, and I gave them to him. But I'll tell you that Ernesto's drum sound at his house is absolutely incredible. It's so fun to play those drums and to record them. And so, if you're getting to, I'm thinking that the secret to making my drums sound better is to get a drum tech to tune them. Yes, do that, because I'm telling you, when Ernesto tunes a drum kit, it sounds really, really good no matter what mics are on there, no matter how the mics are placed on there. Well, maybe within reason, still use, but when if I got to get the nicest drum set, and the nicest microphone package and the best preamps and the best outboard gear with an untuned drum set versus SM58s as my only microphone on a drum set that's tuned, even if it's a low end drum kit, I'd say, I'd pick that. You gotta tune the drum kit. It makes a gigantic difference. So, Arco, I'm not sure if that exactly answered your question, but it is a great question if that's what you were going for. That's something I've been really focusing on. In fact, we're going to be working with Evan's drum heads for a video coming up where we're going to talk about the importance of getting a drum set to sound good, whether it's choosing the heads or tuning the heads. I'm learning more and more, especially working with Ernesto, that like the source, it's so, so important. The source has got to sound great. That's something that Andrew Masters on his channel has been talking about as well. When of course you guys know, if you watch Andrew's channel, he's a great teacher and he's a great engineer, and he's absolutely right. The source is really important, and then the room is important, and then you get to start being an audio engineer. All right, next question here. This is from Mac again. It says, I once applied a rubber gel dampener to a snare drum. Is such an application effective for cymbals? That's a curious question. I would guess probably, I mean, you could try it. Why not? Throw it on there and see what happens. But I would guess that there's something about the symmetry of a cymbal that is really important to its sound. So if you start putting more mass on this side, I don't know if it's going to turn out like you want it to. I think it would probably make the cymbal sound darker because the mass would probably make the edge of the cymbal that vibrates so much and so quickly at a higher frequency, I think it would start to dull that out. So you can try it, but when you put it on a drum kit, it's less about changing the tone and more about changing the overtones. So I guess it is changing the tone, but yeah, I don't know. You can try it. It probably wouldn't hurt anything. I'm not sure. I don't want to make you break your cymbal, but I don't know. I've never done it, and I've never seen anybody do it, but I am curious now. All right, here's a question that says, any tips for EQing a digital drum with only right and left output channel? I can see that being a challenge. I would ask, is EQ the tool to reach for? Because you can fix some stuff with EQ, but I would guess that the main issue you may be running into with an electronic drum kit is that it's not in a room and the other stuff you're recording is. Or if nothing's in a room, then everything's in its own unique like virtual space. If you're using synths and you're using virtual instruments, and often what you run into is that there's no space that unites the things together. There's no cohesiveness between the instruments. And that might be a tonal thing, like a spectral problem. But more likely, I would say maybe you add some reverb and a short delay, like a pre-delay to the electronic drum kit. And then maybe you actually create a bus that has a reverb on it, and you send the drums to that, and then you also send like the guitar to that, and maybe even the keyboard and the vocal or something. Just the instruments go into this one reverb, so it's as if you're simulating a room that all of these things are inside. So that'd be my recommendation. Just in general, tips for EQing anything is sort of it's an impossible question to answer, because EQ, sometimes you don't need EQ at all, and sometimes you do need EQ. And you could even have the same exact instrument with the same exact sound, and in one mix you might need EQ, and in another mix you don't need EQ, or you need a different use of EQ. So EQ is such a situational thing that I don't really have tips for you, without knowing specifically like what's in your mind of how you want the drums to sound different. So if you say the drums sound too boomy, well then maybe I would recommend you try cutting somewhere in the lows or low mids. Or if you say the drums sound too dull, maybe I would say try boosting in the highs to be cohesive with the rest of the mix. Maybe I wouldn't use EQ at all, but rather, um, like I said, use some sort of like reverb or spatial effect. But yeah, that's a good question. All right, looking for. Ooh, okay. Look at this. Arco, Mac. Arco says that as a drummer, yes, it's effective. And I think what he's talking about is using a moon gel or a gel on a cymbal. He says you might lose some washiness, which I think, yeah, I guess like washiness can be good or bad. Oh, and then here, look, this is great. I love to see people communicating. It says the main problem is the sharp attack, which I don't think gels reduce the attack, but reduce the general volume. I could see that. Totally, it's got to change the tone though, because it's still going to make sound. And I would say that it's not going to just turn everything down. It would probably, I'm guessing that if you put a gel on a cymbal, it's going to like low pass the cymbal to some degree. All right, it says, what is your opinion on people who say not to cut anything below 20 hertz? Even though most subwoofers cannot reproduce those super low frequencies like the the L Acoustics KS28 goes down to 20 hertz. It's an interesting question. Let me think about this for a sec. I mean, if you've got a speaker, let's just say this, like this thing doesn't reproduce 20 hertz for sure. But if, maybe this has some circuitry inside it that would already be a high pass filter that would cut out anything below the frequencies that it can reproduce. In fact, I bet you it does. But like, if it didn't, it would try to reproduce 20 hertz. And that's probably not good. I mean, it's definitely not good. And it is potentially bad, because you're sending it something that it can't reproduce, but in its effort to try to reproduce it, it could impact the higher frequencies. So, I mean, especially if you're talking about acoustics, you're probably talking about live sound. I think it's wise to high pass a lot of stuff in live sound. I know there are videos and people around saying don't high pass everything because it causes phase issues. And like a high pass is itself a phase change, but it also high pass filters exist for a reason. And in live sound, I feel like if you've got a system that can reproduce the frequency and you want the frequency there, then sure, don't use a high pass. But if you've got a system that can't reproduce the frequency, use a high pass. I don't know, like taking out that frequency could not only get rid of stuff you didn't want anyway, but it could also really be useful for preventing feedback in live sound and rumble that just exists on stages. Like I think high pass filters, especially in live sound, are really useful. And then I get to thinking, could energy that's in, let's just say we're in a DAW, could energy that's at like 10 hertz impact energy at 30 hertz or at 50 hertz? I don't know. I mean, if those waves were in the air, our ear um, would experience masking, right? Because that's a psychoacoustic phenomenon. So, but I don't think the 20 hertz, anything below that, I don't know if that's actually getting to the speaker, is what I'm saying, because there's probably like the microphone you use. If you ever look at the frequency response of an SM58, that doesn't pick up lower than 20 hertz. And then it goes into a converter that itself might have a high pass. I'm not sure. I know it has a low pass, but You know what I'm saying? Like, if you don't hear a difference, I don't know if it matters at all. Maybe I just say that. But if you hear a difference, then forget what other people say about not cutting it, you know? Um, yeah, I lean toward I only want to send to the PA or to the speakers what I actually intentionally want there. So I tend to use high pass filters because I rarely want stuff below 20 hertz to go there. Yeah, so it's kind of a complicated answer, but it's an interesting question. I've never actually heard people say don't cut stuff below 20 hertz. Yeah. Just looking for some more questions. Again, thanks for being here. Appreciate everybody sticking around. Be sure to pick up those free resources up there. It's it's a free library, and once you're in there, you can access all of the free resources. So check it out. If you don't want to be on the email list, just simply hit unsubscribed, and that'll be that. Here we go. What advice would you give for a live band moving from an analog desk to a digital desk? The Behringer XR18. I think, digital is going to be so much more flexible. So much more flexible. Analog desk, if you're used to being able to reach and grab a knob, there is a benefit there. An analog desk is the outputs are going to do what they do. Aux output is whatever you send to the aux. Main output is whatever you send to the main. And by default, that's probably what the XR18 is going to be as well. Like output 1, 2, 3, 4, they're probably defined to some default thing. I would guess it's like output 1 through 6 are monitor mix out through 6, or mix 1 through 6. And then the last two outputs are probably the mains. But the thing I'm trying to say is you can change all that and sort of get confused. But as long as you don't change that, I don't think that that's an issue. But then when you start to look at like the flexibility that you get with digital, oof, it makes it so worth it, in my opinion. Let me put a video in here. I actually made a whole video about 7 advantages of using a digital mixer for live sound. And that sounds like exactly what you want. Someone put that in. Oops. That didn't work. Okay. Digital mixer for live sound. Okay. So I put a comment in the comments below. You can't click this on the screen, but in the comments, you'll see digital mixer for live sound. Click that, watch that video. I don't remember exactly all the things that I talk about, but there are so many. If you're a band, you could have an iPad that you could pass around and people could make their own mix. Or if there's one person who runs the console, that person could just now use an iPad to do that. There's not a real knob, there's not a real fader, but you can also fit a lot more in a lot smaller space. You've got way more processing than you would have had on your analog console. You'll have compressors on every single channel, and it's not just a one knob compressor either, like you might have had on your analog mixer. It's like a real compressor with attack and release and D and all this stuff. You'll be able to probably have as many mixes as you need. I think the XR18, I'm not sure, but I think it's got 6 mixes, one for every member of your band. Yeah, I think that that's a no-brainer for me. However, if you're used to it, then you're used to it. And I totally get that. All right, let's look for a few more questions here. I'm going to stick around for like 10 more minutes. If I didn't get to your question, I'm sorry, but thank you for being here. I'm going to try to get to as many more as I can. But I do really appreciate you being here. And I'm going to do this once a month, okay? We also have a once a month, Ask a Professor session, and that's where I and our professor Gabe Herman from the membership, we come on and we talk about audio stuff. So he knows a lot more than I do about a lot of stuff. So if you're interested and you're a member, please join us. We're going to do that next week. I think it's on Tuesday, but I'll have that on the events calendar soon. And if you're not a member, consider joining, because I tried to get to all the questions here, but that's what the membership's all about. It's like, it's not just me making random videos and you trying to find the stuff. It's me there for you to answer your questions. And I can only do that for so many people in these sessions, but our members have gotten priority. And in the membership, we answer questions as quickly as we can. Okay. Any tips for the level between kick drum and bass in live sound mixing? I don't know. Make it sound good. Like, I know that's not a great answer, or it's definitely not the answer you're looking for, but it probably depends on genre. And at the end of the day, you just got to trust your ears. So if you're listening, you're like, that kick is too loud, and then you turn it down and it's too quiet. Maybe ask yourself, where is that kick too loud? Maybe it's too loud in the low frequencies that are competing with the bass, but you can still hear the kick through that like 1K to 2K clack that comes from the beater. So maybe it's not a level problem. If you're feeling like moving the fader down to your taste isn't fixing the problem, maybe consider like, where in the frequency spectrum is the kick or the bass too loud or too soft? And maybe that'll help you. Maybe that's a better answer than use your ears. Like, don't think in the dimension of the fader. Think in the dimension of the instrument as a whole across the spectrum. All right, trying to get to as many of these as I can. Lightning round. Sorry, I'm working with like a 8th grade reading level here. I wish I was joking. All right. Okay. I'm looking to host events and do sound. Currently, I have a decent sized stack, bass, boss, PA, and you picked it, Allen and Heath CQ18T. Where would you recommend I start to learn to use a mixer? I would recommend you start with this video that I made. So I made a video about using a digital mixer. The video I made is about a Yamaha DM3 that I use right here, but the principles, just like all my videos, will apply to whatever you're using. So I'm going to put this in here for you. Oscar, you can find it. I'm going to say digital mixer for live sound. That's video number 1. Again, you're not going to be able to click this on the screen, but if you find that comment, you'll be able to click that link. And then I just recently did another video. There it is. I did another video with a PreSonus mixer. Again, it's not Allen and Heath, but the principles in that video will be helpful for you. I'd watch this one first, digital mixer for live sound. That's the basic setup, how to connect mics, how to set up DI boxes, how to set up your speakers, etc. But then this one, you're not doing live stream mixing. But this video I made will help you understand the different ways to make submixes, which could be useful for you. So again, the first video, digital mixer for live sound, watch that for sure. Then if you want to learn more, maybe check out this live stream mixing video that I put down below. That'll talk about subgroups and auxes and matrices and things like that. A little bit more advanced, but if you learn how those things work and what they are, essentially, it's going to be really helpful for you as you're using a digital mixer for live sound. Yeah, it's exciting. Allen and Heath makes really good consoles as well. Okay, let's try to get a few more before I have to sign off. Yeah, so this is a good question that's relevant. Do analog mixers and digital mixers use the same principles to operate? Yes, and They're slightly different. In an analog mixer, you're going to have channel strips, whereas in a digital mixer, in order to save real estate on the surface and give you the ability to mix way more channels, the channel strips are usually on the screen or in different sections, where like the EQ section applies to whichever channel you select. But I would recommend for you, Genesis, go ahead and watch that same digital mixer for live sound video. Down below in the comments, there's a comment there that I put in there. Digital mixer for live sound. If you click that video, that's going to help you understand um, how digital mixers are very much like analog mixers. Okay, I'm going to try to get to a few more questions, but I got to go soon. Yeah, Arco, please do connect with me directly through a direct message in the membership. You know, I don't really want to be giving emails out over a live stream on YouTube, but I'd be happy to help you get in contact with people I know who do this sort of thing. Um, in terms of being a drum tech, that's really cool. Um, I'd like to help you however I can. But just send me a DM in the membership area, okay? Okay, here's a question. Our worship sanctuary is large with a lot of hard surfaces. Perfect. It says we have a lot of acoustic reverb. Yep. Can't get the church to invest in acoustic treatment. What other options do we have to push volume? So, yeah, I guess what I'm hearing is you need it to be louder, but when you make it louder, there's a lot of acoustic problems. Yeah, I mean, I really wish you could get the leadership to invest in acoustic treatment, because that would make not only any music that you're doing in the church better, but it would also make the presentations more audible. So acoustic treatment, I know you already know this, but that would be the number one recommendation. The next recommendation would be placing your speakers and like selecting speakers and placing them in a way that it doesn't put too much energy to the wall. So let me see if I can give you a visual real quick. Let's say that you've got like a rectangle, okay? And the speakers are here. If they're firing a bunch of sound right at the wall, it's going to bounce back in. But if they're angled in a little bit, so much as, so long as they don't spill onto the stage, you want to minimize how much of the sound spills onto the wall. So you could use a narrower speaker, or you could use the same speaker you've got and angle it in a little bit. But again, be careful not to put too much on the stage, or you might deal with feedback. But upgrading your speakers is going to be way more expensive than getting acoustic treatment. So I don't know. I think acoustic treatment would be my number one recommendation, especially if it is hard surfaces everywhere, because even if the sound doesn't hit the wall right away, it's still probably going to hit the floor and then hit the wall and then come back to the audience. So you want to use acoustic treatment however you can, but I know that's not really an option, says your comment. So maybe just angle in the speakers a little bit and see if that helps. All right. Let me see if there are any other. Oh, well, now I see this. It says, bro, what LUFS are you hitting? It sounds a bit quiet to me, but I guess audio engineers don't mind quiet. Yeah. I didn't realize it was quiet. I just see a little green circle. I'm not really using pro audio streaming equipment. So I get my levels set here to a good level. And then I hope for the best, but I'll gain that up a little bit for everybody next time. Sorry. I see that right before I have to sign off. I see some other questions here, but it looks like we got to the vast majority of them. Again, a little bit of a checklist. First off, thank you for watching the videos. Thank you for being here live with me. And I hope that you found some value out of this. Second thing, we've got the QR code up here, and we've got a link down in the description to get access to the free resource library. And then we've also got a link down there if you're more interested in taking the ear training course and getting mixed coaching help that I've mentioned throughout this. And I see a member left a question, so I'm going to get to it real quick. It's Arco. It says, do you have any good recommendations for mics, for measurement mics, which would be good for SPL measurements for professional work? If you're doing like professional acoustics work, I would recommend getting something that is or can be calibrated. If you're doing something that's not professional, maybe just get one of these off Amazon for 20 bucks, 30 bucks, 50 bucks. And then a measurement mic, they range. I've been using this Earthworks M23 for a really long time, and I've had pretty good luck with it. I'd call this professional, but again, you'd have to use this with a system that can be calibrated. This is just a microphone. So if you're doing SPL stuff, the professional way to do it is to have a big SPL meter that can be calibrated so that the data you get from it is actually valid. All right. But now that I've answered all the members' questions and a vast majority of the YouTube questions, I really do need to be getting on the road here. So thank you all for joining. Resources are in the description below. And yeah, I'll see you next month and talk to you soon.